Welcome, everyone, to Interviewing 101. My name is Eloïse Eonnet, and I am the Director of Coach Connect and a career coach at the Muse and Fairygodboss. And acing the interviewing process is something that I work on with my clients on a daily basis. So I'm really looking forward to being here today and chatting about it with all of you. We know that looking for a job can be difficult. We've talked about this already today, and it can also be a discouraging process. And as a coach, I know firsthand that interviewing is often where job seekers struggle the most. There's the most anxiety around that part of the process. So to help you during that process, whether you're actively looking for work today or you will be in the future, we've put together a fabulous panel of experts today to offer their advice on navigating this specific part of the job search process rather. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by Kat Almanzor Hancock, who is the West Region Senior Recruiter at Sonepar USA, Kellie McCann, who is the Global Employer Brand and Recruitment Marketing Manager at Walmart, and Heather Schott, who is the Director of Talent Acquisition for the Americas at Wabtec Corporation. So thank you all so much for being here. And I'd like to start at the beginning with a topic within the interviews that comes up a lot in my conversations with job seekers. And I'd like to hear from each of you on this one. I'm curious, what are some key elements that make an elevator pitch impressive to listen to? Do you have any tips on perfecting your personal elevator pitch? Any tips and tricks and approaches and structures are going to be helpful here to our audience. So, Heather, can you kick us off with this, your take on this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eloise. Sure. So when it comes to an elevator pitch, think about what are the most important pieces of information that you want someone to know about you in a brief headline of 30 seconds or less. It's really your opportunity for you to inform someone of your personal brand. So depending on your audience will determine what important information and details you share in your elevator pitch. Essentially, you'll want to consider your audience. In an interview situation, what are the most important points about you that an interviewer would want to know? Be clear in your objective of the points you want to get across. Who are you? What do you do? What are you looking for? And share your current work, leadership, volunteer experiences, skills, accomplishments, whatever it may be that confidently tells your story at a very high level. And what is your goal? What are you interested in doing, achieving? Share a specification of what you want. Keep it concise, genuine, and natural without the jargon. And using these tips will be the most successful approach for how to formulate and handle your elevator pitch.
Yeah, nice. So what I'm hearing is keep it high level, but tell them exactly what they need to know in the first few minutes of that interview. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Nice. Kat, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you should have a couple of personal elevator pitches ready. Again, it's dependent on the situation, right? Whether you're literally on the elevator and introducing yourself to the president of your company or introducing yourself to a potential employer. Since it could be 30 seconds to a minute, right? It's a good idea to have one general pitch you can use at any moment. But I think the hook is the most important part of getting that attention from the beginning. You want to make it memorable and also speak naturally. I think sounding too rehearsed can make the conversation feel a bit forced. So do your best to deliver your elevator pitch in more of a conversational tone. And then I know 30 seconds to a minute, but if you speak too quickly, the listener might miss some important information. So give your elevator pitch at a slower pace, a thoughtful pace to ensure that they understand, they have a time to process what you're saying.
Yeah, that's so key, right? Because it's like we say it used to be short, so we try to rush through everything and say as much as possible. And linked back to what you were saying too, Heather, it's about knowing your audience and adapting specifically just the most important information that they need so that you can actually start a conversation, right? Kat, you mentioned conversational tone. You ultimately kind of want this to become a conversation starter, right? So that's great. It takes practice though to really slow yourself down and engage people. Kellie, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely agree on those points. And to what you said, Eloise, I think practice makes perfect. So the biggest advice I would give on this is don't be afraid of self-promotion. Building your personal brand is all about what what an elevator pitch is for. So in order to perfect it, you're going to need to practice it in a multitude of mediums, whether that's, letting your boss know every week or so what it is that you're up to, whether it's talking with your cross-functional partners about what it is that you're bringing to the business, or networking via LinkedIn and, connecting with colleagues and letting them know who you are, what you do, what your future career goals are. It may feel cringe to a lot of people initially to go out and do that. It does not feel natural to everyone. I'm definitely in that camp. But, unless you're in a business where you have your own agent or your own publicist, there's simply not, other people who are going to share your work and your accolades for you. So it really is mandatory in today's day and age where we're all focused on our own work and our own selves and our own careers. So, again, practice really does make perfect. And it's kind of just like flexing a muscle. We all have to do it.
Yeah. Doing it over time is such a key thing, as you mentioned, right? It's not just waiting for that key moment where all lights are on you and the big decision making process is about to happen. It's do yourself a favor and actually get that practice in over time, right? The more you say it, the more you share it, the more easy it is going to be to share that information. But you're also reminding people constantly of what you can bring to the table and what you can help them achieve, which is really, really great. Yeah, nice. The interview process has changed so much in the past decade. And one big shift that's happened, of course, is, even before 2020, really going virtual. And it feels very different to a lot of job seekers that I talk to. So, Kat, I'd be curious to hear, what are some tips and tricks, or what are some ideas you have around effectively preparing to present yourself virtually in the context of an interview?
Yeah. So it's very simple. It all comes down to preparation. Prepare ahead of time. It comes down to testing the links of the meeting invite, so you're not downloading that program or software 5 minutes before the interview. Check your camera, check the audio. Oftentimes, depending on the platform, whether it's Zoom, Teams, it's not compatible with your specification of your computer, right? And of course, make sure your internet connection is good. Just making sure your laptop is fully charged if it's not plugged in. And then be in a relaxed atmosphere so you can concentrate and then limit the distraction. In a virtual interview, you should dress the same as in face-to-face interview. Doing that, it makes you appear professional and excited about the opportunity, but it also makes you feel more prepared and confident, right? And then body language, it speaks volume even in virtual interviews. So maintaining that good posture, making eye contact, and use gesture if you want to convey, your enthusiasm and interest. Pay attention to your facial expression as well and the tone of your voice to ensure that you appear engaged and enthusiastic. In most interviews, you shake hands with your potential employer at the beginning and the end of the discussion. But since it's a virtual interview, you can't do that in a video interview. So I would say find other ways to exude enthusiasm, smiling, giving confident wave with eye contact. And then also establish a rapport. It's still necessary. So you can do that by being prepared to talk about common interests, finding some other neutral topic to learn about your interviewer and having that conversation. And then last but not least, as with every interview, be authentic. When interviewing virtually, you can speak, you're in a relaxing, familiar environment, right? So show the interviewer who you are and why you're the best person for that particular role.
Mm-hmm. I love all of that. There's so much that's out of our control in the job search process. It's so important for us to take the time to prepare the things that we can control. And the simplest things can make such a huge difference, like having a computer plugged in so it's not like dying halfway through the interview, right? Little things like that can really set us up for success and really build that confidence, that ability to be authentic. Because when we do have everything feeling okay around us to the extent that we can, right? Control those things. It really does boost that confidence and that ability to engage, as you said, in an authentic conversational way, even through a screen. Have you seen interviews happen that really feel like a true conversation through a screen?
Yes. Yeah. And it all depends too on how the conversations start. I think that sets the stage.
Yeah. So going back to the previous question that everyone answered here, it's that in that elevator pitch, right? Establishing that tone of a conversation as the first person answering a question, you really get to set that tone. So making sure that you really establish that at the top will help the rest of the interview roll. Nice. Heather, I'd love to ask you the following question. Would you share some examples of common interview questions and strategies for answering them, right? So, again, going back to what can we control? We can't control everything, but we can prepare some things. And specifically, what are your thoughts on using the STAR method of storytelling for interview responses?
Yeah. So some examples of common interview questions would be, as a leader, how have you created an environment of trust where your team feels safe to take risks and learn from stumbling or failure? Can you provide a specific example? Or another one might be, tell me about a time when you had to create and execute a strategy. What specific information did you gather and use to develop the strategy? And what was the approach you took to execute it? So those are a few examples of interview questions. To answer them confidently, I am a big proponent of the STAR method. For those who aren't familiar, the STAR method is describing the situation, task, action, and result of a scenario. It's a common structured approach to answering behavioral-based interview questions using a straightforward format. So it helps the candidates to stay focused on specific examples and what they're sharing about a situation and their capabilities. And it also helps the interview team with additional probing when perhaps a candidate hasn't shared enough details or as much as they could about an example they're using. So to break down the STAR method from a candidate perspective and timing for explanation, I'd suggest that when answering a question, spend about 20% of the time talking about the situation. Explain the situation so your interviewers understand the context of your example, but they don't need to know every single detail. Next is the task, and I'd recommend spending about 10% of the time talking about the task. Talk about the task that you took responsibility for completing or the goal of your efforts. Next is the action, and that is where the majority of the time should be focused, which should be roughly 60%. And you describe the actions that you personally took to complete the task or reach the end goal. Highlight your skills or important characteristics addressed in the question as you describe all of the impressive steps you took toward achieving the goal. And then last is the result. So this should be about 10%. Explain the positive outcomes or results generated by your actions or efforts. And here it's important to highlight quantifiable results when it's possible. You may also just want to emphasize what you learned from the experience or some key takeaways. I think the important thing to remember about the STAR method is, just the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior and learnings. So the STAR method really helps candidates to pull the important details to the surface while providing a more structured format of information for an interviewer to listen for in a candidate's response.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for breaking that down, because I think a lot of people know of the STAR method, but then it's like, how do you actually apply it? How do you break it down? What should you focus on? Without a good understanding of the situation, the actions that you take in your story don't have relevance or don't have as much significance, right? So really setting that up at the top, I think, is awesome. And I always think of the STAR method as an opportunity to show, not tell, right? It's not just like, oh, here's what I did, right? It's really, let me break down what it looked like for me to react to the situation that happened. And then that last piece is the value that you can create. The impact that you had back then will be the value that you create moving forward. So I love that you said, yeah, that past stories are really the best way to showcase what you can do for them in the future. That's great. Yeah, thank you. Uh, a big fear that my coaching clients kind of bring to my coaching sessions with them is not knowing how to answer a question or being asked one out of left field and just being completely lost and not know how to think quickly in the moment. So, Kellie, I'd love to hear from you. Would you share some tips for handling these unexpected and really challenging, stressful moments for people during the interview while maintaining professionalism, composure, and like being able to move past that moment?
Yeah. I'll also add, after like 13 years of being in the talent acquisition space, it's still a scary position to be on the other side of the table, which is why I firmly prefer it over here. So completely understand. It's not comfy for anyone, no matter how much experience you get. So totally get it. My best advice would be to always have a bank of prepared stories, experiences, projects, etc., just ready to go and pull from, kind of like an emergency kit. And the way I've been able to prepare from that was actually from my interview experience at Amazon, my previous company. And they basically prepped us before applying at the company. We had a prep call at the company before getting ready for our interview. So we weren't even at the company yet. And they were like, we just want all our candidates to be prepared. Here's the prep call before your interview. I'd never experienced that before at any other company. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever, simply because they knew their interview experience was hard. It was pretty legendary. They are known for being a tough company. And they basically had and encouraged everyone to use the STAR method, like Heather was just speaking about, which was great. But to prep their questions according to their leadership principles, which they're very, it's the ethos of the company. So if the company that you're interviewing with has a certain set of values or maxims or what have you, it does make it very easy to kind of categorize and organize your professional experiences, your projects, your examples, according to what those values and maxims and principles might be. So if you can kind of arrange and organize your examples that you're trying to think of what these STAR situations and examples might be according to, like, one or two examples per maxim or what have you, that's a really easy way to organize and think about, like, okay, if they're asking me a question about what's a time that you had a project get negative feedback, how did you evolve immediately or what have you? I'm thinking of the Nike Maxim, evolve immediately, because that's another company I used to work at. That you already have something prepared and ready to go. You have, I have this example, I have this example. So that does make it a little easier when you know you have something to kind of pull from your repertoire. So that's a really good thing that's helped me previously. Another suggestion I would give is just to maintain your confidence and control over the situation if you do get, a curveball question, by remembering you can always ask for some extra time or say, hey, do you mind repeating the question? I want to make sure I understood you correctly, or I want to make sure I'm getting the correct answer to your question, or something like that. You can ask them to repeat the question. You can ask for some clarification. It shows your composure. It shows your ability to handle a hard pressure situation just by remaining calm, cool, and collected, which, again, being someone on the other end of the interview table, is what I'm looking for when I ask a tough question. I don't necessarily need someone who's going to answer a question like that if it's not a great answer. I need someone who can handle pressure, calm, with grace, etc. And it's also a great opportunity for you to take that time and think about how you can relate your answer back to, some of those banked questions. And then lastly, I would also say to just remember and keep in mind, you can always use the end of your interview to just say, hey, I want to make sure I answered all your questions. Was there anything that perhaps I didn't answer thoroughly or clearly? Can I provide any more answers? You can always use that to wrap up anything that may have not been clear in the interview process, because that would also show me that you care about being thorough and you care about getting the job done well. So that's always a good one to add.
Yeah, I love that last one, right? Because I find that often people feel like they need to be perfect in the moment. We go back to being like the good school child, right? Like we're all like right there looking at the teacher and trying to please, rather than saying, this is just a conversation. And if I don't answer that question perfectly, or if I feel a little frazzled, it's okay to come back and be like, hey, that question wasn't great. Like, can we discuss it further, right? Which is what you're inviting people to do here. And I think that's just so powerful because we don't give ourselves permission to do that often in these high pressure moments.
Yeah. Perfectionists unite. It's tough.
Yeah. And the other thing that I just really love that you said too is, and something that I think about a lot in going into an interview is basically you said at the beginning, like go in with an agenda of things that you want them to know so that when you are thrown a question that you haven't thought of, or if they ask you a question slightly differently than the way you thought they would and it throws you off, you have something to anchor yourself on, whether it's your leadership principles or specific skill sets that you want that you really want them to know you have and that you want to highlight, that you want to tell stories about. It's a great opportunity in those moments just to pause and breathe for a second. It's always shorter for them than it is for you, right? Those moments of getting yourself together, and just anchor yourself in that content that you want them to know and slightly pivot your answer if need be.
Yeah, I like the way you said that because you're going in that interview telling them something you want them to know about you. So if you need to adjust they could be asking you about like, your favorite cooking recipe. If you need to pivot that into like the favorite vacation you took, there is always a way to weave that. There's always a story you can tell to make sure it adjusts to that narrative. And it ties back into the personal branding and elevator pitch that you asked about in the beginning of our session. I mean, it's all about who you are showing up as in this process. So there's always a way to weave it to how you need it to be.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. There's so much more agency in the process than we let ourselves believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. Heather, as a director of talent acquisition, you've sat through countless interviews in your life. In those interviews, I'm curious, what have you seen that are some common mistakes that candidates make, and how they can think about avoiding them and prepare to avoid them?
Yeah. So this is a great topic because answering interview questions is all about it's all about balance and being comfortable talking about all of the great things that you've done or that you're capable of. And sometimes candidates don't talk about themselves or their specific role when they're sharing an example. They don't share enough about themselves or what their role was. They talk more about we or the team or others involved, which is great to have a team mindset. But an interview is a time to sell yourself and why you are the person for the job and what you will bring to it. So when answering questions, it's important to explain yourself in the first person using I to talk about how amazing you are and all that you accomplished. And on the flip side, sometimes candidates talk too much and try to oversell themselves. So what's important is to take a deep breath, talk about yourself and your experiences with confidence and in a natural conversational way while being specific, concise, and clear. Also, no one is perfect and we've all stumbled, which helps us grow. So when sharing examples, talk about those experiences, what you've learned along the way, and how it has helped to shape your perspective and who you've become. We're all human, so embrace the opportunity while remaining calm and not getting intimidated. And one other mistake candidates make is they don't close or ask for the job. If you really want it, then say it. Seal the deal at the end of the interview, thank the team for their time, and sincerely express your interest and confidence in your abilities to be successful in the job. It can make such a difference. And I think Kat mentioned it earlier, especially now with virtual interviews, around just your body language and being relaxed, and all of it ties in together in terms of, how you're explaining and sharing about yourself and what you're sharing about yourself, and just being confident with and letting that be expressed through your body language as well.
I love all of that. It's a strategic conversation, right? It's not just answering the questions because they've been asked. Mm-hmm. It's actually engaging in a direction that you want to go in, right? So and I'm bringing this up because it's leading towards the ask. Tell them what you want and ensure that you share the information they need to hear in order for that ask to be an obvious yes, right? It's so important to show up that way. And I think that a lot of the candidates that I work with, that I'm sure you've seen, who either ramble, they talk too long, they don't know where they're going, So they don't know the key takeaway of their answer. They don't know why they're answering the question. In other words, kind of going back to that agenda we talked about, right? What Kellie brought up is like, know what you want them to know about you. And that really should be driving your answers. So that helps with being concise and driven, and also getting to that ask, right? Being super, super clear there in what you want out of this conversation. That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And you brought something else up that's really important. You said that things can feel really scripted, or kind of inauthentic. And Kat and Kellie, you both brought this up in different ways as well. It kind of kills the conversation, right? It's like the last thing you want to do is talk to someone who's reading a script. It's just in the back of your mind, whether you're aware of it or not, you're kind of shutting down when someone's not actually engaging with you physically, as you know, Heather and Kat talked about, engaging with eye contact, etc., but also just feeling natural. So, Kat, I'd love to direct this question to you. What are some ways that you think candidates can demonstrate their skills and experience and everything that we've talked about so far without sounding too rehearsed, like balancing that preparation without feeling scripted?
Yes. So, yes, it's good to be prepared, but authenticity is key for me, in my opinion. Be yourself. Tell the stories and provide the examples from your experience instead of giving that generic answer. So, use specific examples from your past experience, because that can really showcase your skill and demonstrate how you handle different situation. I've had a candidate recently, actually, who had humor injected into their answer. And you could tell that the answer was based on their memory. So it was genuine, as they were laughing at the situation and shared that while what they learned, from it. So it showed their authentic self as they're sharing the answer. And you could tell that the answer was based on something that they've done before. And then I think the one thing too is make sure you listen before you respond to understand the question. Sometimes it's a two-part question. So pay close attention to the interviewer's question before you answer all the question. You might be prepared. You prepared an answer for a specific question already, but sometimes an interviewer might add a follow-up question to elaborate on that specific answer. So keep that in mind and be prepared for that, so you don't just have a prepared answer for a specific question.
Yeah. It happens so often, right? That you prepare all your perfect answers to all the exact questions and then they ask none of them, right? And you've done all this work and put in all this emotional time and preparation, and then it kind of goes out the window. Absolutely. I want to touch upon quickly there that being authentic piece that you talked about, like the fact that individual you're referencing could laugh about his past experience with you, creates such a moment of emotional connection. And something someone in a previous session earlier today was talking about was that emotional response creates connection, and really that's what lands the job, right? It's do you feel connected to this person? Do you feel like they're being genuine and real with you? And can you remember the stories that they told, which oftentimes are connected to emotion, right? Good storytelling is a good emotional journey that you bring somebody on. So I love that. I think it's super, super important. So whatever it takes, right, ahead of time to move away from scripts and just show up as yourself and respond to the best of your ability, I think is really, really powerful here. We have a few questions coming in, actually bunches of questions coming in on the chat. So I'm going to make sure that we can keep some time today to get to those. There's some really wonderful ones, but there are two more questions I'd like to ask. And one for you, Kellie. On the flip side, there often is this opportunity for candidates to ask questions in return to their interviewers. What should they be asking someone at the end of an interview, and what is the function of that moment within the interview process?
Yeah, I think it's one of your final moments to leave a lasting impression as a candidate, and to get the final questions that you need answered about the company, about if this may be the right job for you if you're having multiple interviews, and just to get a full lay of the land about the role that could be your next career step. I will say there are different questions I would asked to a recruiter versus a hiring manager. You know, the recruiter isn't always going to have a lot of the information about like, you know, the roles day to day, like the functions and, you know, purposes and what the next year may look like for you, et cetera. But some of my favorite questions to ask are, you know, besides what the next steps in the interview process would look like, obviously the recruiter should be telling you that anyway, but please ask that if they don't. Would obviously be to get some semblance of what the company culture looks like. And I think this is one that is best geared towards your recruiter, because those of us in TA, like, we are the keepers of the kingdom. We've seen it all. We hear it all. We're usually the first to get all the info. So on behalf of all recruiters, all I ask is that you do this in a way that asks them a little bit about their experience and ask them a little bit about themselves in the process, because usually people just come to us when they're like, hey, do you have a job for me? Hey, I know we haven't chatted in 10 years, but can you get me this job at your company? So do keep in touch with these people in a genuine, you know, meaningful way, because yes, of course, if we know you, we like you, we've worked with you, we'll get you that job. But, you know, keep in mind, like, be nice to your recruiters is all I'll say. But a good question around this would be something like, what brought you to this company, to company X or whatever? Oh, there is a company X now. Never mind. What brought you to this company? And what's something that surprised you when you got here? That's a nice, thoughtful way to say, you know, has anything been changing? Has your role changed? Something like that. Because it's interesting to hear about if someone's role has changed since arriving. Like, that denotes growth. That may denote any friction within the company. So what they'll tell you and what they'll divulge in that moment is always really interesting. One question I like to ask either of the recruiter or the hiring manager is, what would a successful first year look like in this role? That's always good. It sets the table, expectations, any big projects that are on deck. And then one question that is an important one, and I will say needs to be asked with confidence, is, do you have any hesitations about my background or my skills in relation to this role? Like, at the end of the interview, maybe in towards like more of a final stage. And to someone's point earlier, I believe it's about, you know, kind of sealing the deal and making sure that you're really expressing that interest in this role and letting them know, hey, I'm here, I'm ready for it, this is the role for me, let's go. Because now you're putting the recruiter and or the hiring manager in the hot seat to say, well, no, I don't think so, I think you're great actually. Or they need to tell you, well, maybe you don't fit the like traditional mold of someone who has a college degree or someone who went to, you know, a FANG company before this or something like that. They're going to have to put themselves on the line to say those things to you. And then that puts you on the defense to be able to say, here's my prepared answer for that. Here's why my experience is actually better. And here's why I am the ideal candidate. So if you can come ready, prepared with those rebuttals and show up confidently to address like why you are actually the best candidate for that, it honestly just gives you an even better opportunity to shine and leave them with that final, like, wow, this could be the candidate for us.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a second opportunity to pitch yourself. You can start the interview with a pitch and you end it with real specificity around why you would actually be a great fit, even if they have reservations or questions remaining.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's this term that's flying around the internet called shift shock. You know, like people accepting a role without clarity on actually what it's going to be like. And you know, there's so many opportunities for a candidate to learn about exactly what it's going to be like. And these questions, as you said, are a perfect opportunity to say, hey, describe this or that. Mm-hmm. What does this look like? Have them really give you a description of the things that you're curious about so that you can do your due diligence as well and make sure that it's not just you asking for a position, but it's you choosing the right one for yourself. And this is such a key moment that I think we kind of throw away or that we don't use strategically enough to ensure that we're actually choosing the company for ourselves. Yeah. I'd like brief responses from each of you on the following question before we take some questions from the audience. And Kat, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on if candidates should send a thank you email after an interview?
Yeah. I actually like receiving thank you email after an interview. You know, it's generally recommended and appropriate, regardless if you were contacted about the job, but it's not required. but it's a great way to show appreciation to the interviewer's time, and can make that positive impression. And unfortunately, I'm seeing less post-interview thank you notes from candidates in the past couple years. But I think it can create that deeper connection with the interviewer, and to make sure that they remember you positively.
Yeah, it's just good manners, right? Like it reflects well on just kind of how you might show up at the office. Yeah, nice. Thank you. How about you, Kellie? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would also say it gives you another opportunity to stand out. Like Kat said, I don't see that many of them anymore. So when I do get them, I think they're outstanding. And I will say it also gives you another opportunity to say, mention something in your interview, tie back to, maybe that thing that you laughed about. And again, the thing that Kat mentioned from her previous interview, a funny moment, shared experience, something like that. It really gives you another connection point to be able to highlight and make sure that you stay top of mind for your interview team.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, for sure. And Heather?
Yeah, I agree with what Kellie and Kat have said. Send the thank you email. It reinforces your message, interest, and acknowledges respect and value for the interview team's time. I think so many candidates assume the thank you email is not necessary, but for those who send it, it does make them stand out. And this includes when you're being considered for an internal or external job opportunity. I find that internal candidates can sometimes get complacent when it comes to interviews and the interview process in general. So don't make that simple mistake. Every single interview is important when it comes to your career progression and growth. So take the 5 minutes and send the thank you email.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's such an easy thing to do, and just don't skip out on it. It can only help. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many questions from the audience, and we only have a few minutes left, but I want to just quickly go back to that elevator pitch that we talked about at the beginning of our call today. Gabby asks, can you touch upon elevator pitch versus tell me about yourself question? Is it the same thing? Should we think about tell me about yourself, the answer to that as being a pitch, or do we just simply describe our work experience? Briefly, Kellie, can you give us your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I don't think they're dissimilar. I think it's probably I think it's a tell me about yourself. It depends on the setting. If this is in a professional environment, certainly it's similar to the elevator pitch. It's really about, who you are, what you bring to the table, what your interests are, what's your expertise in, and what's your unique angle of, like, what your unique angle that you bring to your industry is. So if it's something about sustainability and employer branding or something, that's where I'm trying to find the unique, pinpoint in there. How would I describe that? How would I be communicating that in a succinct 30-second way? That's something about myself, but it's not necessarily something I would say meeting an individual at the mall or what have you. But in a professional setting, for sure, I would try to find a way to weave that into a conversation that's succinct and have a little story about how working for a fast fashion company really led me towards that in my marketing career. Something like that, I guess.
Yeah, nice. And Heather, going back to what you were saying earlier, it's when you were answering the question at the beginning of today, and also saying, like, make that ask at the end, right? The whole interview to me almost is kind of a pitch, right? There has to be this direction you're going in. So how do you see the difference between the pitch / the answer to tell me about yourself, or is it the same to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's similarities, I would say, where the tell me about yourself could really be anything, right? It could be a generalization. It could be anything about maybe what you do, where the pitch is very succinct and concise and on point. I mean, you could say I have 20 years of HR experience in various industries, and I'm specializing in, these certain areas. And I'm, now ready to grow my career in HR leadership, for example, right? The elevator pitch is definitely more succinct and direct about who you are and why you're there and what you're looking for. where the tell me about yourself could be a little bit loose and a generalization, which could really encompass anything.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Kat, I'd love to ask you a question here. We have questions coming in around making a career pivot. So the question is, any suggestions for interviewing when making a career pivot, when the experience you have differs from the job that you're applying for, and how do you get to the interview stage if making that career pivot? So perhaps let's focus this on in the interview, right? When you're asked questions about your past experience that aren't really in the same context as the job you're looking for, what suggestions do you have for interviewers?
First of all, I think it's great to research the company first and what it applies to your past experience. So I actually made a career pivot, industry-wise. It's same in talent acquisition, but made from healthcare to the electrical distribution. So two different worlds. And what I did is basically shared all the experiences that I currently had and how that applies to the current role. And then also gave information on how I research specific new things. And because you're learning a whole different set of industry information, right? So I think just being well prepared to how you can apply your past experience to that specific role or specific industry. Giving examples, have you researched and done that in the past?
Yeah, nice, wonderful. Thank you. I think that's really, really helpful to a lot of people. There's a lot of stress around that, of making that shift, going back to the previous conversation that was happening earlier today. So that's really, really insightful. Thank you. And as we wrap up our conversation today, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to join us and really sharing the insight and the learnings that you've had over your career. I know that your knowledge and insight and tips and tricks and approaches and language and mindset are going to be really, really helpful to our audience. So thank you. As we were talking, I was thinking about a conversation I was recently having with one of our coaches at the Muse, and she was sharing that the first thing she does with the candidates she's supporting is actually work on interview skills before reviewing a resume, before strategizing a job search. And why does she do this? It's because it takes a lot of preparation to find the vocabulary, to build that story, to think about what you're trying to do. And doing it so early on prepares us for the eventual interviews that will come up, right? And going back to what we were talking about earlier, there's so much we don't control in the job search. But one thing we do know is that eventually we will get an interview, right? So I hope that our conversation today is going to inspire everyone here to start doing that work now. And as Kellie said earlier, start actually putting it out in the world now, talking about yourself, engaging with others about your talents, because that practice and that preparation will only lead to more successful interviews, whether they're coming in the short term or in the long term. So again, extending my gratitude to all three of you for your knowledge and your time today. And coming up next, please don't miss out on our keynote session, Investing in Equality, Women, Wealth, and Well-Being with Michelle Cardiero Grant, founder and CEO of Georgie and founder of Lively, as well as with Sally Krokek, renowned financial expert, CEO, and founder of Ellevest. Thank you all.